Yeah, we can do a brief Radha Madhava.
Okay, can I get a cartoon of it on that? Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Shri Radha Mulidhar ki jai, Shri Gaurachandra ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. We're reading from Canto 10, Chapter 2, Text 3. Is that right? Chapter 3, 4, and 5. So maybe I'll just do this. Do we usually do a call and response for the Bhagavatam?
It just depends on the speaker.
Okay. Thank you. So I'll just say the Sanskrit for the third text, which is Te Pitani Vivishu Kuru Panchalake Kayan Shalvan Vidarbhan Nishadan Videhan Koshalanapi. The translation is persecuted. Actually, maybe I can just read the first two also, since it's just one verse, so we'll get a good. So this is text 1 and 2 from chapter 2 of Canto 10. Sukadev Goswami said, under the protection of Magad Raj, Jarasandha, the powerful Kamsa, began persecuting the kings of Yadu dynasty. In this, he had the cooperation of demons like Pralamba, Baka, Chanura, Trinavarta, Agasura, Mushtika, Arishta, Dvivida, Putana, Keshi, Dhenuka, Banasura, Narkasura, and many other demoniac kings on the surface of the earth. Now, text 3 is today's text. Persecuted by the demoniac kings, the Yadavas left their own kingdom and entered various others, like those of the Kurus, Panchalas, Kekayas, Shalvas, Vidarbhas, Nishadas, Videhas, and Koshavas. And since this doesn't have a purport, we'll also read text 4 and 5. Ekitam anurundhana gyatayah paryupasate hateshu shachu baleshu devakya augrasenina senina saptamo vaishnavam dhama yam anantam prachaksh. And act in his service. After Kamsa, the son of Ugrasena, killed the 6 sons of Devaki, a plenary portion of Krishna entered her womb as her 7th child, arousing her pleasure and lamentation. That plenary portion is celebrated by the great sages in Ananta, who belongs to Krishna's second quadruple expansion. So the translation and purport of this chapter is by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. So the purport is some of the chief devotees, such as Akrura, stayed with Kamsa to satisfy him. They did this for various purposes. They all expected the Supreme Personality of Godhead to appear as the eighth child as soon as Devaki's other children were killed by Kamsa, and they were eagerly awaiting his appearance. By remaining in Kamsa's association, they would be able to see the Supreme Personality of Godhead take birth and display his childhood pastimes. And Akrura would later go to Vrindavan to bring Krishna and Balaram to Mathura. The word Paryupasate is significant because it indicates that some devotees wanted to stay near Kamsa in order to see all these pastimes of the Lord. The 6 children killed by Kamsa had formerly been sons of Marichi, but because of having been cursed by a Brahmana, they were obliged to take birth as grandsons of Hiranyakashipu. Kamsa had taken birth as Kala Nemi, and now he was obliged to kill his own sons. This was a mystery. As soon as the sons of Devaki were killed, they would return to their original place. The devotees wanted to see this also. Generally speaking, no one kills his own nephews, but Kamsa was so cruel that he did so without hesitation. Ananta, Sankarshan, belongs to the second Chaturvyuha or quadruple expansion. This is the opinion of experienced commentators. Om Jnanatimmirandasya Jnananjana Chalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So again, we are reading from Canto 10, Chapter 2, texts 3, 4, and 5. I seek blessings of all the senior Vaishnavas here, Adipurusha Prabhu, Arjuna Prabhu, and all the assembled Vaishnavas, that we may be able to have a fruitful discussion on Bhagavatam. So yeah, we are reading. Can everybody on Zoom also hear me fine? On everybody. So yeah, we're discussing the second chapter, prayers of the demigods towards the appearance of Lord Krishna. So in this chapter, we see a lot of actually, even towards the start of the first canto, we see a lot of mention of Vrishnis, Bhojas, Andakas, and Yadus. So I thought maybe you can just give a quick history of the whole Yadu dynasty. So in the 9th canto, we discussed the story of King Yayati, who due to a curse by Shukracharya, lost his youth, and then he traded with one of his sons, Puru, who gave him his youth and took his old age. So one of the sons of Yayati is Yadu. So in the descent, in the lineage of Yadu, we see all these names like Vrishni, Bhoja, Andakas. So Krishna, and even Kamsa was also born in the dynasty of Yadus. So in case you're wondering, this word Yadu comes a lot. So we hear like Yadava, Hari Haraya Nama Krishna, Yadavaya Namaha, Yadavaya Madhavaya Krishna. So Yadava, the word Yadava comes from Yadu, or the dynasty, the lineage of Yadu is Yadava. So in this lineage of Yadu, actually we see that there are many kings, many famous kings that actually come in this whole line. And one of the kings that comes in this lineage is Satvata. Actually, this is described in towards the end of Canto 9, that one of the kings of so in the line of Vrishni, we see a king like Shurasena. You might have heard the king Shurasena, who is the father of Vasudeva. So Shurasena had many wives, of which one of the wives that he had is he married a Vaishya woman, a woman of a agricultural trading background, Vaishya. And the son born of that wife was Nanda Maharaj, and Vrishni married another wife who was of a Kshatriya background, and the son born of that was Vasudev. So Surasena had two sons, Vasudev. Actually, the children born of the Kshatriya wife was Vasudev and also Kunti, Pritha. Actually, her maiden name was Pritha. So Shurasena gave Pritha to one of his friends, a king, who's known as Kunti. So when Pritha was adopted by Kunti, her name became Kunti, like an extended I. So if you see in diacritics, the I above Kunti, which is Arjuna's mother, has a line on top, which is Kunti, whereas the king is just Kunti. So when Pritha was adopted by King Kunti, her name became Kunti. So that's why in Bhagavad Gita you see Arjuna being addressed by Krishna as son of Pritha, O son of Pritha. So because Kunti is another name, original name was Pritha. So Shurasena, this way he married different wives, and depending on the wives, he had different sons, like Nanda and Vasudeva. And Kunti is also like a sibling, actual sibling of, I say actual sibling, I'll tell you later, but yeah, she was an actual sibling of Vasudeva. And from Vasudeva, we see other, this 8 sons born of Vasudeva. So we discussed Vrishni's lineage, and along with Vrishni's sibling was Mahabhoja and Andaka. And in the lineage of Andaka, we see like Ahuka, and from Ahuka came 2 sons, which is Ugrasena and Devaka. So Ugrasena is the father of Kamsa. So Ugrasena had many sons and daughters. And of those sons, the chief was Kamsa, as he's famous for his nefarious activities. So the chief was Kamsa. So Kamsa's sisters actually married the younger brother of Vasudeva, and Vasudeva married the daughter of Devaka. So we talked about Ugrasena. One of his sons was Kamsa, and Ugrasena's brother is Devaka. His sibling is Devaka, and Devaka had many sons and daughters. And of the daughters that Devaka had, the chief was Devaki. So actually, Kamsa and Devaki are not actual siblings. They're like cousins. I mean, in one sense, it depends on how you define siblings. In India, usually cousins mean they also say sister or brother. If someone is your cousin, they'll say brother, or they'll say cousin, brother, cousin, sister. Like in America, we just say cousin, right? We don't say cousin, brother, cousin, sister, just cousins. So Kamsa and Devaki, they're cousins actually. So Kamsa's sisters married the younger brother Vasudeva, and Vasudeva married the daughters of Devaka. So this way there was a close connection between all the dynasty of the Yadus. There's, like we discussed, there's like Vrishni and Andaka. So Kamsa comes in the line of Andaka, and along with Vrishni, Andaka is the Mahabhoja, and that's if you hear the word Bhoja dynasty, that comes from Mahabhoja. So of all these, like the Bhoja dynasty was one of the more predominant ones. And since Kamsa was one of the main rulers, he's really powerful, he's sometimes addressed as Bhojarat or Bhojapati or Bhojaraj, or the king of the Bhoja dynasty. So sometimes we hear these words like Vrishni and Bhoja and Andaka and Yadus, it might be confusing. So all of them actually come in the lineage of Yadu, who's the son of Yayati. So this is discussed across like multiple cantos, and this history goes back and forth about how it happens. And Vasudeva, like we discussed, married Devaki. So another name for Vasudeva is Anaka Dundubi. So it said that when Vasudeva was born, all the demigods started showering flowers, and there was drums and musical celebration welcoming the birth of Vasudeva, because he was to be the father of Krishna, at least the birth father of Krishna. So Anaka is like a kettle drum, one of those drums which has like a kettle drum, and then Dundubi is one of those big military drums. It's like an onomatopoeia. Like Dundubi is like literally that drum which makes a dum dum sound. So Anaka, Dundubi are different kinds of drums. So since when Vasudeva was born, all these drums and bugles and all these flowers were sort of all these drums were sounded to herald his appearance. He's known as Anaka Dundubi. His birth is really auspicious because he was to be the father of Krishna, and he did the heroic act of carrying Krishna, the Supreme Lord, on his head and crossing. So that's like some basic history of what we're discussing so far. So even Kamsa is actually a Yadu. He's Yadava, actually. He's in the line of Yadus. So it's so interesting that he was attacking his own lineage, his own family, extended family, and he imprisoned his father Ugrasena. So that's one of the qualities of people who are for demoniac mentality. I'm hesitant on using this word demoniac or demons, but it is what it is. He was of such a mentality. Actually, even in contemporary times, you see a lot of kings who do this, who imprison their own family member. Like in India, about a few centuries ago, there were many Mughal invaders, like from the from the golden age of Islam came many invaders, Persian and Mughal invaders, like the Mughal dynasty. There's a famous Mughal dynasty. And one of the invaders was Aurangzeb. And he imprisoned his own father. There's a long history, but he imprisoned his own father, Shah Jahan. Shah Jahan was a famous emperor who erected that Taj Mahal as a memorial to his wife. So Aurangzeb, he imprisoned his own father due to politics. So we see even in contemporary times, I mean, it's not so contemporary, but still we see in contemporary times, the kings imprisoning their own father. So Kamsa, we see, imprisoned his own father, Ugrasena, and he started sort of attacking all the Yadavas, and they started running helter-skelter, running away from Kamsa. So until chapter 1, we discussed about Canto 9, we finished talking about all the dynasties and all the stories that come with those, like the lineage and different dynasty. And Canto 10, chapter 1 then starts with the prayers of the demigod, like how Mother Earth was burdened by different military phalanxes and different kings and demons and different. She was overburdened by such political, even in our modern times, we can see how our Mother Earth is burdened by so much political warfare. So Mother Earth in shape of a cow then approaches Brahma, as we read in chapter 1. She takes a form of cow, and then she approaches Brahma and all the demigods go, as it often happens, Brahma goes to the Shweta-deepa, or the ocean of milk, and prays to Vishnu. And then it's interesting that Vishnu responds in the prayer, but only Brahma can hear that. Other demigods cannot hear. So Brahma hears this in trance or in samadhi. So with his eyes closed, he can hear Vishnu speaking, and Vishnu is guaranteeing that, don't worry, I'm well aware of what's to happen, and he assures that I myself will descend in the lineage of Yadu. And then he instructs the demigods, and all the demigods are present, and he instructs the demigods and their wives to say that, please, you also take birth in this dynasty of Yadu and help me in my pastimes. And assuring in this way, the demigods leave. So this way we see that in the lineage of Yadus, there's a lot of demigods. It's a mixed, actually. Some of the eternal associates of Krishna himself descend in the lineage of Yadus. Some are demigods, some are perfected souls, and so on. So we see many gradations in the lineage of Yadus. And even Krishna's associates, some were, like I think in the Bhagavatam, we see some of the gopis, there's different gradations of the gopis. Some of the gopis were Rishichari gopis, some are Shrutichari gopis, some are Devakanyas, some are Gopakanyas. Like Rishichari gopis are those gopis who are like rishis in their past lives. When Lord Ramachandra came, some of the rishis were like perfected souls. They fell in love with Lord Ramachandra in a conjugal way. And of course, this was a more transcendent sort of love, prema. So when they expressed their desire to be part of his pastimes, Lord Ramachandra said, in this incarnation, I have a Ekapatni Vrata, that I have a vow of only accepting one wife. That's why even when Shurpanaka approached Lord Ram, he declined, because a Kshatriya's dharma is when any woman approaches him for shelter or any kind of conjugal gratification. It's a duty of a Kshatriya to accept such a woman. If any woman proposes or sort of approaches a Kshatriya, it's his obligation to accept, because that's what a king does. He has to accept his citizens, even if it means marrying them and giving them protection. But then he had a vow that Ekapatni Vrata, that only accept one. Why were we discussing this? Lord Ram. Oh yes, Rishi Chari Gopi. So these rishis, he said, not now, but in my next incarnation as Krishna, you can also take birth. So those rishis took birth as rishis, Rishi Chari Gopi, and the Shruti Chari Gopis are all these personified Vedas also wanted to take birth and participate in Krishna's Vrindavan pastime. So they became like Shruti Chari Gopis, and then we have and then there's elaborate descriptions of what is their constitutional in terms of, are they like Nitya Siddhas or Sadhana Siddhas? Like in Nectar Devotion, we see that there's like a nice sort of distinction given. There's two kinds of Siddhas. Like Nitya Siddhas are those eternally perfected souls. They're not someone who attained perfection at some point in time. They're eternally perfected. They're Nitya Siddhas. And then the other kind is Samprapta Siddha, or those who have attained perfection. And then Prabhupada elaborates that in either case, in the ultimate issue, there's no difference between the two. Just because some conditioned soul in this world took up to Krishna consciousness and attained perfection, then that doesn't mean they're any less than Nitya Siddhas. And this is important because there was some controversial, anyway, I don't like to get into controversial topics, but some claim, some line of Gaudiya Vaishnavas that only those born in India, or those gurus born in India, are Nitya Siddhas. Other gurus born in other parts of the world, they're not. And they say you have to be born in Bharat Varsha, in India, to be perfected. So Prabhupada and we don't follow that idea, that principle, you know. In fact, it is said that all these, like we were discussing in the lineage of Yadus, many perfected souls took birth. So like that, even in Prabhupada's disciples, Prabhupada said many of his disciples, actually, one time he was in India at the house of this industrialist, Srinaji Prabhu, you know, and Srinaji was a really young devotee then. Prabhupada had come with many of his young disciples, so he was there, Srinaji Prabhu. So when Srinaji, I heard this in one of his class where he himself narrated this incident. Srinaji was really young then, probably the same age as Prabhupada's disciples, like 18, 16, 19. So Prabhupada was talking to Srinaji Prabhu's father, telling him that he would like him to adopt some of his disciples because they were American disciples, and he wanted him to adopt so that they get Indian citizenship. So Srinaji's father was really confused, like, really? You know, because all of India wants to go to America, get American citizenship. American passport is like one of the most powerful passports. And here, Prabhupada's young disciples, like a young, handsome Jayapataka, back then he was not a sannyasi. So young, handsome Jayapataka, and many other disciples were there, like 19-year-old. And so Prabhupada was asking Srinaji's Prabhu's father to adopt Jayapataka Swami, Jayapataka then, and give him citizenship. He was really confused, like, what's going on? And he asked Prabhupada, what's going on? Why do you want him to get an Indian citizenship? So Prabhupada said, you don't understand. Because of my Guru Maharaj's mercy, Lord Chaitanya himself has sent his personal associates to help me in my mission. You know, so he said, some of these are not ordinary souls; they are Lord Chaitanya's eternal associates. So many of these Prabhupada disciples, glorious Prabhupada disciples, we have some here in our. We're fortunate to have some, to get our association. So we cannot come to this conclusion of Nitya Siddha and Samprapta Siddha. Even our own Guru Maharaj, is fascinating how he was at a young age, he was looking for a spiritual life. And it's so dramatic that he was in his room meditating. And right at that point, his friend knocks on the door and slips in a Back to Godhead magazine, saying that I know you're into this stuff. And he didn't open the door because he wasn't interested in the conversation. But when he left, he looked at that magazine, and at the back of the magazine was a photo of his guru, Srila Prabhupada. And he knew right away, this is it. I mean, couldn't have been more dramatic than that. At least in my case, I can speak. I was kicked and smashed by Maya for like a long time before I was forced to take up Krishna consciousness. So anyway, in the line of Yadus, we see like some of his some of the Yadavas were eternal associates, and even in Prabhupada's disciple, we see some are like Prabhupada himself said, some are his Lord Chaitanya's associates, some are actually perfected souls from the past life, some are like, so we have different gradations. So like that, even in Yadu, in the Yadu dynasty, we see different demigods, eternal souls taking birth in the line of Yadus. So this way, Vishnu assures Brahma and all the demigods that I and my associates will take birth, and then he goes back. And then we hear about how Vasudeva then marries Devaki, and then the chapter 1 we see Kamsa is then waiting, so to speak, the procession of his what's the word I'm looking for? He's just sort of carrying this procession. Yeah, thank you. It's escorting the procession. Sometimes you take the reins of the horse and you're sort of leading the procession to give support to your sister. And then, as we know, that we hear like a Akashvani, or like an unembodied voice saying, "You fool, you're dragging your own death, because the eighth son of your sister will be the cause of your death." And it's fascinating that because that's the doing of those demigods. Why would the demigods do that? Because that meant that Kamsa is now imprisoning his own sister, and then he's about to kill. So why would the demigods want more trouble to saintly people like Vasudeva and Devaki? Any thoughts?
Did you do anything possible to facilitate and increase the imminent appearance of work?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Prabhu. Yeah, because it is said that Vasudeva, by escorting Devaki's procession, he was doing devotional service. And all the demigods were scared that Kamsa already is so powerful. Now if he engages in devotional service of pure devotees of Krishna, like Vasudeva and Devaki, he'll be even more powerful. So they really wanted to intervene right then and stop that, so that, and like you said, Prabhu, that they wanted to sort of quicken up the process of his death. So then he hears the voice that, the eighth son, and then he imprisons. And then so initially what happens is he's about to kill, and then Vasudeva is trying to pacify by different philosophical points, and he doesn't agree. And then he finally comes to a practical negotiation. He says that it's my wife's son that's going to be a threat to you. What did my wife do? It's your sister. And then he agrees. He doesn't agree. First, he gives philosophical arguments and he doesn't agree. And then he says, I'll trade in my sons for my wife. And then he agrees. So then it so happens that the first son is born. And then Vasudeva dutifully comes, keeping his word, and then presents his son. And then Kamsa says, oh, it's okay. Because it's the eighth son that is danger, not the first son, So. But the Narada, again, as usual, shows up. He's known as a transcendental troublemaker. Anywhere there's Narada Muni, there's always some kind of a stir up, So the Narada tells Kamsa that he gives this example of a lotus flower. And, he says, you're thinking a lotus flower. He says, if you count this way, this is the eighth petal. If you count this way, this is the eighth petal. If you count in a different way. So he says, how do you know which one is? He said, they're just really, smart. They'll just outsmart you in some way. You don't know. If you count from the beginning, eighth son is this, eighth. And if you come from the back, then the first son becomes the eighth son. How do you know which is the eighth son? Then comes really provoked. Yeah, you're right. I mean, this decides to kill all of the confusing. Like, why would Narada Muni do that? He's killing babies, like infants. Why would you you're like a baby killer? So there's a backstory, as you guys know. like there's a backstory. I think even in this purport, we see this backstory of Kamsa. You know, he was in his previous life, he was Kalanemi, the son of Hiranyakashipu. So actually, it's described in the third canto of how when Brahma was I don't want to say procreating, but he was creating generations of species. The first sages like Atri, Pulasya, Vashishta, and all those munis, I forget, Marichi, and all those munis, Swayambhuva, Manu. And so what happens is one of the daughters of Brahma becomes sexually attracted to one of his daughters and starts approaching her. So one of the sons of Marichi, they sort of laugh at Brahma, saying that, you know, this is shameful, you know, you're approaching your own daughter. So because of that, they get cursed to be born. Because of that offense, they get cursed to be born as grandsons of Hiranyakashipu. So Hiranyakashipu's son is Kalanemi, who's Kamsa, and then Kamsa's 6 sons are the sons of Marichi. Just as a side note, I heard once from Madhavananda Prabhu that he was asking his guru Gauragovinda Swami about this incident, that how come, you know, Lord Brahma got attracted to his daughter so much so that, you know, his own offspring, like Marichi is basically Brahma's son, so it's like his grandsons are laughing at Brahma. And then he was walking with Gauragovinda Swami, his guru, when he asked this question with a group of people. He ignored him, he didn't answer. He asked him again, he didn't answer, like he ignored him. And he had asked the third time. And then he turned around and gave him a tight slap. And he said, don't ever criticize, you know. But that is the whole lesson from this pastime. It's not so much as Brahma chasing, but the idea is don't criticize, don't get, like our Guru Maharaj makes us take a vow in initiation, along with chanting 16 rounds and following the 4 regular principles, that you'll not hear criticism. Not only will you not speak of any criticism, but you won't hear criticism. He says one of the qualities of good devotees is, as soon as there's criticism, they'll just somehow sneak out automatically. Their phone rings or something happens that they're not there. Anytime there's a controversial discussion, they leave that assembly. So anyway, so then the sons of Marichi are born as the grandsons of Hiranyakashipu, and then they're praying to Lord Brahma that we want a similar benediction as Hiranyakashipu. And Hiranyakashipu, when he hears this, he becomes infuriated. He says, I'm the Supreme Personality. You know, why do you need to go to Lord Brahma? This is an insult to me. And then he curses them, saying, you'll be killed by your own father. And there's also a story of Kalanemi, as you guys already know, during the churning of ocean. When the demons and the demigods were fighting. And at one point, a fight breaks between the demons and demigods. So one of the demons, Asuras, was Kalanemi, and he was attacking Vishnu, and Vishnu he dispatches a trident, and then he's killed by his own weapon. So that's Kalanemi. He was killed by Vishnu, but then that animosity was still there, that hostility towards Vishnu. So he took another birth as Kamsa to continue with that enmity towards Krishna. So that's why when Kamsa came, he killed his own sons in his past life. They were his own sons. So those 6 sons of Kalanemi, Garbhas, they're known as Garbhas. They were born as the sons of Devaki, as you guys know, that the Kama, Krodha, Lobha, Mada, Moha, and Matsarya, lust, anger, greed, madness, illusion, and envy. These are the 6 enemies, so to speak, of bhakti. So they represent, actually it is said that Marichi represents the mind, and these sons are born of the mind. These anarthas are born of the mind. And Devaki represents bhakti. And Kamsa represents fear. So these 6 sons that were born of Devaki, just like our bhakti starts to grow, and these 6 enemies are born. So these enemies have to be killed. So that's why these 6 sons are killed. And then after, it's interesting that after these 6 sons, Krishna doesn't directly is not born, right? Why is that? After these anarthas are gone, Krishna should appear in the heart. Any thoughts? So why doesn't Krishna appear? Still doesn't appear then. Yeah.
Not only do you have to uproot anarthas, but you have to establish bhakti in the heart.
Yeah. Absolutely. You also had a point, bro.
I think speculating that the guru also has to appear in Balaram.
Absolutely. Both of them, yeah. So Guru first appears. It is said that Guru first comes and cleans the heart and then sows the seed of bhakti. And then that's when Krishna comes. Just like before Krishna descends, it is said that Vrindavan Dham and all of the Sandhini Shakti manifests on earth. I think in Garga Samhita, it is described that when Krishna tells Radharani that I'm going to descend in the earthly world, Radharani complains that no, Krishna says, you also come with me. And Radharani says, no, I'm not going to go without Vrindavan. And Krishna assures, don't worry. Along with me, Vrindavan, Yamuna, Govardhan, and all of them will manifest. So Balaram first comes, just like we see to give a more modern example, like a helicopter doesn't just simply land in like a traffic signal or like any like your backyard. It lands on a helipad, right? There's a proper designated landing place. So like that, Krishna doesn't set foot on this material world. Vrindavan first comes and manifests, and then Krishna enters Vrindavan. It said that Vrindavan parityaja padam ekam na gacchati. The Krishna doesn't even take a step outside of Vrindavan. So Balaram first comes. But another point to note is after these six sons are killed, Krishna still doesn't descend, because after these six sons are killed, it's still the mode of goodness. Krishna doesn't come in the mode of goodness. He only comes in the state of Vishuddha Sattva or Vasudeva Sattva, the mode of transcendental goodness. So sometimes we think that just being in the mode of goodness means bhakti. So Krishna doesn't care for the mode of goodness. That's why we see in the first canto where Narada Muni in his previous life, he's meditating and he gives a spurti or a glimpse of Krishna, Vishnu. And then he gets a glimpse and that glimpse goes away. Vision goes away. And then Narada Muni is in lamentation and he's trying really hard to get that vision back, but nothing he does gets it back. Then he hears his voice saying that in this life, you'll not see me again. So that is to increase his further hankering. So that's because Narada Muni was in the mode of goodness. And so the message is we have to transcend this mode of goodness to be in Vishuddha Sattva. That's when Krishna consciousness will manifest. Pure bhakti will manifest in our heart. So like this, we see that after the six sons are killed and then Balaram appears. So in this verse, it is said that Balaram appears, who's a manifestation of, he's a manifestation of Shankarshan, who's the, what is the verse? The plenary portion is celebrated by great sages as Ananta, who belongs to Krishna's second quadruple expansion. So after these six sons are killed, then Krishna's plenary expansion of Sankarshan takes birth as Balaram, or the Adi Guru. And it's interesting, it's known as he's the second quadruple expansion. Again, as you guys might have heard in CC and other books. Krishna, Swamsha, Bhav and Vaibhava expansion. But in a nutshell, it is said that the first expansion of Krishna is Balaram. And from Balaram comes the first Chaturvyuha, or the first quadruple expansion of Sankarshan, Vasudeva, Niruddha, and Pradyumna. And from that first Sankarshan, that's known as the Mool Sankarshan, or the root Sankarshan. From that comes Narayan, and from Narayan comes the second quadruple expansion. So the Sankarshan that comes from the Narayan, again, there's a second quadruple, Dvitiya Chaturvyuha expansion. So the first quadruple is in charge of the spiritual world, and the second quadruple is in charge of the material world. And so, from the second Sankarshan or the Mahasankarshan comes Karuna Dakashaya Vishnu, and then Garbha Dakashaya Vishnu, Shira Dakashaya Vishnu, and so on. So this Balaram is that expansion of the second quadruple expansion. So here, Sukadev Goswami says that when Balaram entered the womb of Devaki, Devaki was filled with lamentation and joy. Harsha Shoka Vivardhanaha. She was overcome with joy and lamentation. What a contradictory experience, right? Why joy and lamentation? Let's say you're getting married and you say, I'm filled with joy and lamentation. Your spouse is not going to be pleased when she hears that, right? Or you're about to sort of, whatever joyous occasion you're getting initiated, you're saying, oh, I'm happy, but I'm really unhappy. So Harsha Shoka Vivardhanaha. That's because on one side, she was really happy that all the demigods would offer prayers, and she was happy that the plenary expansion of Krishna has taken birth. But then she knew the fate, just like her first 6 sons, the fate of the 7th son. Of course, she had a motherly affection. She wasn't seeing that, okay, the Supreme Personality is. So she was also filled with lamentation, thinking, oh, my 7th son is also going to be killed. And but of course, this is a transcendental lamentation because Devaki was a pure devotee. And we see a similar experience in Chitraketu's pastime also. Chitraketu really wanted a son, despite all odds and in spite of hearing all these instructions, but he still wanted it. Sometimes it's best to just let destiny take its course. But then if you try to go against the grain, so to speak, then it only creates more misery for us. So when Angira, along with his friend Narada, came, and Angira started instructing Chitraketu, and Chitraketu said, I really, really want a son. And he tried to explain, but he wouldn't sort of listen. So then he said, okay, fine, I'll give you this magical lotion. Just give this to your wife and you'll get a son. And at that point, Angira says, this son will be the cause of your joy, greatest joy and greatest pain. And at that point, Chitraketu doesn't understand greatest joy and greatest pain. But he dismisses that. And he gets a son. And as you know, his son was poisoned and he dies. And at first he's filled with joy, and then it's overcome with lamentation. So that is how material happiness is. But it said that material happiness and happiness and distress are like those best friends. They're holding hands and they walk. And imagine if one of those friends walk into the room, automatically the other person is going to walk into the room. It's one of those, or like one of those married couples, you're all together. So happiness and distress are those best friends who always walk around in pairs. If you see happiness, that means you're going to see distress soon. So, but here Harsha Shuka Vivardhana is not a material lamentation like we see in Chitraketu. So this way, Devaki, then we see that what happens is the 7th son of Devaki was that she gets a miscarriage. And again, this is a really fascinating story of Devaki's, the mystery of Devaki's miscarriage. There's beautiful commentaries given by different acharyas of what exactly happened. Because Rohini at that point was in Vrindavan. She was also Vasudev's wife. She was in Vrindavan under the protection of Nanda Maharaj. So then when Devaki had a miscarriage, simultaneously Balaram was also born of Rohini. So then this creates a confusion in the mind of Parikshit. In chapter 1 of this canto, I think text 8, Parikshit asks wait, so he hears that Devaki has 8 sons, of which the 7th son is Balaram. Rohini has 7 sons, of which the first is Balaram. So he's like, wait, how can one single child in the same body be born of 2 mothers take birth in the wombs of 2 mothers? He says, okay, I can understand if it's different bodies, if it's the same soul, he takes birth and he gives up that body. The same son, same body, because in case of Krishna and Balaram, they're non-different from their bodies. They don't have to give up their body. So then Parikshit asks this question, wait, what's going on? So then we see Rohini is in Vrindavan, right? And then she gives birth to Balaram. So then it feels a little strange, like a wife getting pregnant in the absence of her husband. So then everybody would question, right? What's up with that? How is a wife getting pregnant in the absence of her husband? So Jiva Goswami explains in his book Gopal Champu of how this happens. So when Balaram enters the womb of Mother Devaki, so at that point, Krishna orders his expansion, his internal energy, Yoga Maya. That actually before there's a backstory to that. So what happens is before Rohini and Devaki were both with Vasudeva. Remember when we discussed how when Vasudeva negotiates with Kamsa and Kamsa says, okay, fine, just give me your son and I'll let you go. So at that point, Devaki and Rohini were with Vasudeva in Mathura. And when the first son was born, Devaki, and that's when Vasudeva took that son. So until that point, Rohini was with Vasudeva. And then when Vasudeva gave the son and he imprisoned both Vasudeva and Kamsa imprisoned Vasudeva and Devaki, right? So by that point, Rohini was representing Vasudeva and Devaki in prison. And then when Kamsa started killing the sons of Devaki, then Vasudeva started getting a little fearful of the sons that were to be born of Rohini. He thought that this Kamsa is totally untrustworthy. Although the eighth son of Devaki were to be killing Kamsa, but still there is no guarantee. This Kamsa cannot be trusted. He'll kill the sons of my other wife. So he then instructed Rohini to leave Mathura. So when Rohini was 3 months pregnant, she got on a horse, described, and she went towards Vrindavan to take. So anyway, I won't go into detail because you're short of time. So in Gopal Champu, Jiva Goswami describes how Krishna instructs his Yoga Maya that you take this child and you transplant this child in the womb of Rohini. Everybody comes up clueless. What happened?
Prabhu, you are muted.
Sorry, I might have been disconnected and logged back in. So when she was in Vrindavan, she was 3 months pregnant. And when the transplant happened, at that point, she was 7 months pregnant. And from that point, she was again another 7 months of pregnancy, basically 14 months of pregnancy with Balaram. So anyway, the Acharyas give beautiful explanation how Balaram was transplanted in the womb of Devaki. So I'll just conclude with this last point. There's so much to say, but I'll just skip some of the things I wanted to share. One point was all the Yadavas, when were persecuted by Kamsa, they started taking positions in the court of Kamsa, fearing Kamsa's persecution. Some started leaving Vrindavan Mathura area altogether, leaving when Krishna, Mathura, Nanda Baba and all, because they thought, let's be far away from Vrindavan residents. And some started taking positions in Kamsa's court. That's so fascinating, right? You take shelter of your enemy. So what's up with that? So again, in this commentary, Prabhupada explains that it was actually a diplomatic move because they knew it's a safe position. You have two options. One is you completely leave Krishna and Nanda Baba and all the residents of Vrindavan and never to be seen, That's one option. Other option is, okay, let me just approach Kamsa. That way, at least I know the whereabouts of Krishna, and they're sort of close enough with Krishna, and they knew that Krishna will be the cause of the death of Kamsa, the eighth son. So they took the opportunity to do that, so that way they're close. So although they were serving Kamsa, but still their allegiance was with Krishna. So I heard one nice point in one of the classes on this point some years ago. Sachinanda Swami talks about how just like Akrura took a position in Kamsa's court, like that in all of our lives, we might have to make this decision in our Krishna consciousness, where sometimes we make a decision which apparently takes us away from Krishna, but that move actually brings us closer to Krishna. Like for some, that means you have to get married. Or for those who are already married, that means you have to leave your marriage. Or if you don't have a job, that means you have to take up a job. Or if you already have a job, for some, it would mean then you have to give up your, whatever that is. For everybody, the situation is different. Sometimes, not always, sometimes in our Krishna consciousness, you have to make this choice, of course, under the guidance of Guru and Vaishnava, that apparently you're making a move which takes you away from Krishna, but that actually brings you closer. So this way we see how Akrura also did that. And there are many so much things can be said I'll on this point, but I'll keep it short. That is the dilemma Arjuna also went through, that apparently he had to do this action which
Prabhuji,
seems
it's time
contrary.
to open for Q&A. It's time to open for Q&A.
Okay, so unfortunately I had a lot of things to share, but no worries. So I'll just, if it's okay, I'll just take 1 minute to just wrap up this discussion. So this way, the Yadavas then took shelter of the court of Kamsa, and then, as you know, Akrura then goes to Vrindavan to take Krishna back. And then I wanted to also share one other point between similarities between Vrindavan Lila and Krishna, Lord Chaitanya's pastimes, since Gaur Purnima is coming. Of course, we won't have time for that, so I'm not going to get into that. But I wanted to share the similarities of how Lord Brahma appealed for the appearance of Krishna, like that Advaita Acharya, who's Sadashiv and Mahavishnu combined, also pleaded for Vishnu to appear, and then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appeared and took incarnation. And how the Sankirtan movement, just like in the Yadu Dynasty, there was a mixed descendants of some eternal associates, some demigods, some perfected souls. In the Sankirtan movement also, you will see some eternal perfected associates, some demigods descending. Prabhupada said actually one of the third and fourth generation of devotees will actually be demigods. They'll be lining up to take birth from the families of devotees. So in the Sankirtan movement also you see mixed. And the last point I'll say is, there's a nice pastime in the CC where Pratap Rudra is with Sarvabhauma and Gopinath Acharya, and he wants to see Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his associates. But then for some reason he can't through a house. And then as the associates of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu are coming, Gopinath Acharya is one by one describing to Pratap Rudra. Pratap Rudra is blown away by seeing all these associates. And he's asking, please tell me who are these people? And he's telling one by one, this is Advaita Acharya, this is Raghunandan Acharya, this is Vakreshwar Pandit, this is Shivananda Sen, Raghava Pandit, and Vasudev Ghosh, and so on. And Pratap Rudra is blown away by seeing these associates. Like imagine if Vishnu Jan Swami were to come back, or Gaur Govinda Swami is back, Indra Prabhu is back, or Bhakti Tirtha Swami is back, all these, and imagine you're in Mayapur Kirtan Mela and all of these associates are walking in. Wouldn't you be blown away? Even one of these pure devotees can shake up the whole world. Imagine Indra Prabhu is back, Vishnu Jana Swami is back, Tamal Krishna Swami, Goswami, imagine all of them in one place. That's a potency. So this is the Sankirtan movement of Lord Chaitanya. So this Sankirtan movement is not an ordinary movement. This is the prime benediction of humanity at large. This is the benediction moon, which can cleanse the dust of the heart. So the Sankirtan movement is not different from the birth of Lord Chaitanya, Lord Krishna. Just like Krishna appeared, Lord Chaitanya also appears. Wherever there is Sankirtan, Lord Chaitanya also appears. So anyway, sorry, I went a little overboard because I wanted to say something about Gaur Leela since Gaur Purnima is coming. So with this, maybe we can have some reflections and comments or questions. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Yes.
I can ask a question. So you were talking about Krishna coming into the womb of Devaki and Balaram coming first to purify the womb. So for Krishna coming into our heart, I understand that Paramatma is always with the soul, but there is a certain point where Krishna basically comes into our heart. And I've heard before that it's kind of like a shit bottle. Once you get that shit made inside of the bottle, you can't get it out. So Krishna in his true Bhanga form, once he comes in, he doesn't come out. So how do we know if Krishna is in our heart? And how do we get Krishna in our heart?
So can you repeat the last part? You said two questions.
How do we know if Krishna has come in our heart? And how do we get Krishna in our heart?
You want to repeat the question?
Yeah. So the question from our live studio audience, Emily, is that we hear that the super soul is already there in our heart. So then how do we know, does Krishna also manifest in our heart? In addition to that, how do we know if Krishna is manifested or not? And she gave the example of, you said ship.
Like a shit bottle, those bottles, and then they make a shit inside.
Okay, yeah. That it doesn't get out, yeah. So yeah, like it's known as the plenary portion of Vishnu, known as the Shirodakshay Vishnu is in our heart. So from Karnodakshay Vishnu is the Garbhodakshay Vishnu. Karanodaksha Vishnu is the soul of the whole material manifestation. From that comes the individual universes, and Garbhodakshai enters each. He's the soul of each universe. From Garbhodakshai comes Shirodakshai, and Shirodakshai is the soul of each atom and every. So that's Shirodakshai Vishnu is in our heart. But that's the portion of the plenary portion of Krishna. We hear Amshas and Kalas. Amsha is like the portion, and Kala is the portion of those plenary portion. So that's the Shirodakshai Vishnu in our heart. And that is what the yogis are actually meditating on, the Shirodakshai Vishnu. But then you hear that Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam, Iti Chamsha Pumsa, Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam. But Krishna is the original Supreme Personality of Godhead. So although a manifestation of Vishnu is in our heart, but for devotees, we are worshipping directly Swayam Krishna. So I even heard from one Prabhupada disciple, for devotees, actually, like you were saying, it's Krishna who actually enters the heart and he's manifesting in the heart. Now, as far as how do we know if it's Krishna in the heart? Now, I don't have any Shastric reference which substantiates that point. I can only speculate from my side that, I think in one of the purpose of first canto, we have some Pandits here might be able to tell us that one similar question is, how do we know we are advancing in Krishna consciousness? Or Prabhupada says this test of Krishna consciousness is one no longer has any interest in material activities. But as far as how do we know if Krishna is in our heart? I heard one really nice pastime. I don't know if you have time. No, we don't have time for that. But anyway, so maybe anybody has any thoughts of how do we know if it's Krishna in our heart? And I'm looking for Shastric backing to know if it's, and how do I know if it's Vishnu in my heart or Krishna in my heart? I don't have any Shastric claims to back that up. Okay. Vasudeva Prabhu from the altar behind us is giving some, Akashvani, yeah, he's giving some Akashvani. He's saying that the form that you worship is that form that manifests in your heart. I'm thinking of another verse that Bhakta Paradina, where Krishna says that I am maybe I can mute myself. Krishna says that Durvasa Muni chases Darshan Chakra and Durvasa Muni falls at the feet of Krishna. Krishna says that I am in the possession of my devotees and I'm always in their heart. So I'm thinking of that verse. What is the verse? Aham Bhakta Paradina. Naham. Anyway, I'll think of that verse. Adi Prabhu, you have.
As you approach me, I reciprocate accordingly. If we treat Krishna, the deity, like stone, then Krishna remains like stone. If we see Krishna like that, if we invite him, if we want to see him, he'll reciprocate like that in a very personal, intimate way.
Thank you so much, bro. That's
such a cool story. Krishna's going to come, and he says, "Let's all go there," and then everybody comes. And even Asura is hiding within Kamsa's court as Kamsa's servant, just so he can be really front row seat and really see what Krishna's doing, and everybody wants to be there. It's so nice.
Yeah, like when Krishna came in Kamsa's court, they said that everybody saw Krishna differently. The servants of Kamsa saw him as death personified. All the older gopis saw him as like a beautiful sun. All the young women saw him as Cupid personified. All the young cowherd boys saw him as like the best. So everybody saw Krishna depending on their own adhikar or their own vision. So I think we can use also that example to see that depending on what your vision is, Krishna will accordingly manifest, as we hear from Adi Krishna Prabhu and Vasudeva Prabhu, that is the form Krishna manifests in our heart. And we also see that. Yeah. So any other thoughts or comments before the altar opens up? Yes, Anupam Prabhu.
Just say quickly, I like the point you're making about how in the Urchitana Sankirtan movement, all these different souls manifested, and Prabhupada was making that point to Indian gentlemen about how these boys aren't ordinary, my spiritual master sent them.
Yeah.
He made that point often, saying that you were sent, all my sight, you were sent by my spiritual master. And it's reminding me of the whole idea of when we carry out the order of the spiritual master, then he provides all the necessary things for it to really fully manifest. And so you should see that as Prabhupada's understanding as well. So it's just nice to think of disciples that way, not working so.
Thank you. So just to summarize, Anupam Prabhu saying the Sankirtan movement is not ordinary, and a lot of perfected souls take part. So like Krishna says, Nimitta Matra Bhava Savisachi. This will go on whether you want it or not. The Sankirtan movement will go on. It's up to us to be an instrument of Krishna. Thank you so much. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. I found this Shastric reference. It's the Dadadi Buddhi Yogam Tam verse. It says that the Lord gives sufficient intelligence to the devotee so that the devotee can attain him. If you worship him with love and devotion, he will advise from within. And usually I was thinking, when I have a choice between checking the news and opening my Bhagavatam, I know Krishna is there, and Krishna says, open the Bhagavatam. So Krishna is there, and we know, we just don't follow. So, all right, thank you very much. Have a wonderful day. Open the Bhagavatam, don't open the news.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.